computing area. So in this series, actually, we will be covering each and every item of cloud computing as a topic, and we will be covering that one in a progressive manner. So the format of this presentation is very simple. We start with a topic and we cover it for 15 minutes, and then once that is done, actually we will take up about 4 minutes question and answer session, and then we will keep answering questions to them, and in case we are not able to do that, then we will take up it in the next session. Use this open actually question box to give his questions so that we can answer them during the session. And here actually we have tried to answer certain questions which were there in the past one. Actually, the first question somebody asked last time was actually, can cloud computing be able to give me application I need? Yes, the answer is emphatic yes, because cloud computing is such an innovative process, and in cloud computing everything is treated as a service. For example, the presentation that I'm using is called a service, software as a service. A piece of hardware is actually called as an infrastructure as a service. So the combination of this, the innovative world actually has come out with every kind of imaginable service. For example, on cloud computing, there are services which allow you to convert temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit. There are applications which will allow you to convert distance, determine distance between two locations and put it on a map. And there are applications which will allow you to convert currencies. So the answer to this question is very much yes. It's only a question of you discovering them on the net. Secondly, the second question was asked actually, how cloud computing services can actually be used in your college. See, in my college, cloud computing has been used for extensive reasons. For example, we have been using cloud computing for teaching process. I told you, and you see a few slides later, I actually established one blog site to which is used as a cloud computing platform for my course home. Okay, then students can do a lot many projects that I shown earlier. Administration can also use cloud computing for different reasons. For example, they can establish one particular blog or a website using a free cloud service to support, for example, a placement activity or an IPR activity. And institution can also see. And if you are interested further, actually, you can see my presentation called Cloud for Engineering, which is available on my website. Okay, anytime you can actually see that. So the second question is actually, the next question was asked actually, how cloud computing can, how old is cloud computing? So cloud computing concept is actually about 6 years old. When the cloud computing started in the 1950s with mainframe computer, then only people talking that cloud computing will be needed by the majority of the population at one or the other time. Then it is the requirement of the computing industry to supply cloud computing the way people supply electricity and water. So the idea of cloud computing is old enough, and many of the technologies which are involved in it, for example, virtualization, networking, and all, they were in the making for nearly 6 years. Only in the 1990s, people started using cloud computing on a broad scale. For example, Hotmail, when it was launched in 1996, it was using a lot of cloud computing principles. And once the companies like Amazon and Google came in the 2000 year, it actually became much more famous. Another question is asked, like, what are the different ways in which we can be used in effective teaching? As I told you, cloud computing provides a very good resource for teaching. In fact, I have been using cloud computing for not many things, including teaching. For example, if you can see my presentation website here, like qcloudcomputing.blogspot.in, you actually find how cloud computing concepts can be taught using cloud computing principles. What are the, another question that is asked is, what are the potential applications of cloud computing? And there is, again, it's unlimited. Only imagination is the limitation. People use it in hospitals, people use it in businesses, people use it in enterprises, and so on and so forth. Okay. And one attendee last time asked, like, how many sessions this cloud computing webinar will be happening? So according to me, at least there are 25 topics which are already identified, and I will be covering most of them. Next question which was asked is, how can we use cloud computing in library management? Okay, cloud computing actually is also a great resource for cloud computing, because today most of the libraries are going for what is known as open source mode. Okay, so sometime back I made a presentation on cloud computing for library, that you can see that. But there is another research scholarship, I mean, very scholarly article on SlideShare, which is cloud for library, which you can actually see here. The next question is on, let's see how cloud computing can be used in the labs. In fact, there is some idea called virtual labs. What actually happens? Suppose you want to create a lab for operating system or compiler design. Now today there are sources available on the cloud which will simulate those environments for you. So for example, if you want to establish a virtual lab for operating system, there are labs like GitLab and all that you can all use. In fact, there is one research paper published in IEEE. You can see that link is given down here. What is the notion of security and in cloud computing? You know, privacy and security are the top and fundamental concerns of anybody who uses cloud computing. There are enough policies, procedures which have been already taken and considered, and enough mechanisms are built into cloud computing for both ensuring security and privacy. So, many more questions left. Actually, I will take over a period of time. And about me, actually, in the last class only I told you I am a teacher who teaches cloud computing, and this was the first course I was teaching about 5 years. Since 5 years, still I am teaching this, and I also started teaching PG courses, and currently I am actually moving on to Internet of Things. Okay. In the previous session, actually, I conducted about the introduction to cloud computing, where actually I covered cloud computing, what does it mean, and what is the definition of that. And today I'll be talking about cloud computing concepts further down. Okay. Meanwhile, there is a question. Hi, Ravi. There is not a question actually. Okay. So, should we start? So, of the two things actually we should be knowing about today's topics are cloud service models and cloud deployment models. And you know, one thing that you should remember in cloud computing is everything is a service, nothing is tangible. It only gives you action and result, not physical entity. So, for example, even if you want a hardware, the hardware piece is not given to you. If you want to storage, the hard disk is not given to you. What is actually given to you is actually is that piece of location to store your data somewhere in the net or in the cloud. So, if you ask a question like, what can a user get? As a user, what is that I can get from cloud computing? That is called service. Service is something that you get in the cloud computing format. So, when you talk about the context in the context of cloud computing or in computing, you know there are three fundamental things which are available in cloud computing, any computer system. There is a hardware that you buy, a physical device, and there is an operating system that you install, which is called platform, and an application that you would run. For example, you buy a desktop, and actually you buy either Intel machine or Mac machine or some machine, then that is called actually infrastructure because it is a hardware. It consists of hard disk, monitor, and all the memory, RAM, and all. So that is called a fundamental thing called infrastructure as a service. In cloud computing, you can actually avail this. And the additional thing is called platform. Actually, you have an operating system installed on which you would install further application. For example, if you install Windows application, then actually you install Microsoft Office and on. Suppose you install Linux operating system, then you install something like Open Office or Open Book kind of a thing. Okay. And finally, an application that is installed is also called software. And if you can see on the right side, you can see that infrastructure as a service gives you the fundamental resources like the storage, the server, or virtual machines. So the fundamental thing that happens in cloud computing is you get a basic hardware, and when you are getting basic hardware, it's called infrastructure as a service. Okay. So when you are going for a service provider, you get virtual machines. Virtual machines are those machines which are installed in the data center of a service provider, but for which actually you give access to you. That means they don't give you a physical machine, hence it's called virtual machine. Then there are servers. Servers, you know that for different purposes you can use a server. For example, you can use a server for email purpose. You can use for databases. This can also be accessed as an infrastructure as a service. Networks, in case you need to connect certain machines for whatever the purpose, that can also be available as a service. Storage is something which you know like Google Docs and all allows you to store your data. Load balancers are the programs which allow you to distribute load across different machines. Suppose you have been using two or three servers, and there is there is much traffic on a particular machine or a particular network. This load balancer will help you to migrate load from one machine to another one. The second kind of an application that you call a platform. Platform is actually an environment where actually you develop an application. So in this actually you get a database if you are developing a database application like Oracle, or you will get a web server if you are establishing a website, and you get a developer tools if you are developing an application. For example, if you are developing an application on say Google App Engine, that you will get. Okay. Similarly, SaaS is ultimate thing that everybody would get, where actually you get certain things like Google Docs and so on, so forth. So infrastructure as a service is the fundamental thing that you will be checking all the time. You will be getting all the time. Any questions I'm checking? Okay. How can I download this presentation? Okay. So Mr. Kunjal Gharta has actually asked me that how do I actually download this presentation? See, Kunjal, all my presentations are available on SlideShare. Okay. As soon as the session is over, actually upload it to SlideShare. You can directly download it from there. Okay. Kunal? Okay. So you look at this is how actually it looks in infrastructure as a service. You actually get services like IaaS provides users capability to provision computing storage. And you know from the previous class that provisioning is a unique quality of cloud computing. What it means, like in a provisional store, you can buy a quantity, an item of choice in a particular quantity of your choice. For example, you go to a shop and say, I want half kilo rice or 10 kilo rice. Similarly, in cloud computing, you can go to cloud computing service provider and say that I want 2 MB space. I want one server with this in configuration. So this is actually the first one in cloud computing, the infrastructure service. Then you get a provision. That means you can decide the amount that you want. These resources are provided as virtual machines. The distinction between a traditional computing and a cloud computing environment is actually in cloud computing, everything is virtual. That means you have the services of something, but you don't have that thing itself. That means you can think that you are having a server, but you don't see that server physically. And in this one, actually, user can start, configure, and stop, manage them. Can use operating of their choice. For example, you can say that I want hard disk, and on that, actually, you can install the system of your own, like operating system of Linux and so on and so forth. And then actually, you can start operating on it. So when you're having this, actually, IaaS providers use capability in provision for computing, storage, and resources. For example, you see here actually now here, Amazon actually providing you web services. It is also providing you the storage spaces like and all things. So any question at this point of time? I don't see anybody asking any question. Okay. So this is what infrastructure as a service is all about. So it is a service where actually you get a hardware component for your requirement. So one of the best way to understand the infrastructure as a service is to see this picture. See here actually you are trying to build a house. So when you are building a house, actually you buy certain things like a piece of land, a cement required, and the wood required, and the sand required. So these are the building blocks of building a house. Okay. And similarly, when you build a computer system, the main hardware piece or a processor or a storage or a network card, they are all called building blocks. Hence, this is called infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service, why is called that means the elements that are needed are required are actually procured in this process. Actually, are the basic elements of cloud computing, hence they are called infrastructure. And this picture will clearly tell you that you are working at the very bottom level. For example, you are taking the land to build a house. You are actually making all the physical movement of the of the items and all. You are actually, and what it actually means in computing terms is actually you are physically connecting machines. You are testing whether they are connected or not, and actually you are putting the cards, you are putting the network card, and all those things. Okay, so this, as you know, is a very difficult thing and it is time consuming. So unless you are a very expert, then you cannot actually go for infrastructure as a service, and actually you have to go for next something else. So the next thing actually is in the cloud computing services actually, when you are using infrastructure as a service, the service provider will take care of meeting all the requirements. You see on the picture here, on the right side picture actually you have there are users, and on the left side there is a service provider, and it is the internet which will connect you. So the job of actually managing whatever is needed in terms of space, in terms of servers, in terms of operating system is always left to the user, the service provider. The job of the individual service provider is actually very simple. All that he has to do is to start consuming those resources. So now that you know what is infrastructure as a service, any question is point at this point of time? Any questions? Okay, anyway, I will go on. So platform as a service is the next platform, next thing actually in cloud computing. See, not all people would like to build a house on their own. There are many occasions where actually they don't have patience or the expertise to do that. So what is the alternative? See, now real estate actually has come out with a thing, possibility called actually renting or buying a house. That means there is already a ready-made house which you can actually go. And when you go for that, actually what you have to do is furnishing is worse. That means you get a house or a flat, apartment in a flat, then but you have to decide the color of the curtain, furniture and all. So cloud computing also gives you this kind of occasion that they will not force you to buy all the hardware that is needed or to decide all the hardware. You need to say that if you want to develop an application, I give you a platform. And this is called platform as a service. So in platform as a service, actually, what you get is you can see on the picture, you can get a monitor, all those things is together. For example, there is an application space where actually you can develop your application. On the right side, you can see executor. That means if you have a program, it can be compiled and executed. And a road processor, that means compilation is also possible. So this you can notice, unlike the IA infrastructure as a service, now there is an advanced stage where actually you can presume that these are available and you start operating at a different level. So what you will do actually is um, what you actually do. No. Okay. Okay. So what you can do actually is if you decide an application to be developed, actually you can use this platform. So in the hierarchy of cloud computing, buying a piece of hardware is infrastructure as a service, but buying an environment to develop this application is called platform as a service. So when you are doing this, actually this is. So what you get is actually there are different vendors. For example, you can see apps and apps. They are actually companies like Google App Engine is there, Microsoft Azure is there, Heroku is there, Force.com is there. So what they do actually, they give an environment to develop an application. See, many times you ask somebody to develop a C program or a Oracle application, and on this, this is done actually using this. And ultimately, the third one is actually called software as a service. In software as a service, what actually happens is you will be developing, you will be using as an end user, and then actually you are starting an application. See, now there is a question. I thought cloud computing models are same for different businesses environment. For instance, someone wants to develop application. Yeah, actually, I'm seeing a question here. I thought cloud computing, see there is one observation made by, I thought cloud computing models are the same for different businesses environment. For instance, if someone wants to develop a cloud, okay, architecture for human resources and for the airline customers, does these two systems share the same models? No, actually the models are different. For example, see for example, if you are building a company like Amazon Web Services, then what you are doing actually you are offering infrastructure as a service. So that model is totally different. But suppose you are offering something like Google Docs and all, then that model is different. So you have to decide what level of service, at what level are actually offering a service. So if you are planning Amazon kind of a thing, then you buy hardware and start offering. And if you are planning to offer software like a human resources, then you are offering as a service, software as a service. Okay. So can we merge? Somebody is actually asking, can we merge IAS and PAS? See, technically we cannot merge it. What it actually means is infrastructure and PaaS, they are totally different. But when you are using PaaS, technically, I mean, in a sense, IAS is merged with that. You will be operating as a developer, but actually the resources for which you need, the infrastructure resources are already given to you by the service provider. So from service provider's perspective, it is merged. But from your perspective, it is one unity called platform as a service. So any other questions? Okay. Now I will move on to the software as a service. Software as a service is a model where actually you get a ready-made software for your consumption. See, it is like staying in a hotel. So you don't build a house, you don't even rent a house. You just directly go and stay in a hotel. When you do this, actually, you know that you have no worry of actually deciding other utilities like whether there is a tap or not, whether there is a mirror or not, whether there is a cot or not, whether there is a furnishing is or not. That is not your job. You actually pay. That is the reason you pay to the hotel person and get a room. See, in cloud computing, you can also have a ready-to-run software, and they are called software as a service. If you can see this picture, actually, you can see that software as a service is the third and the ultimate stage of cloud computing, where you get ready-to-use software for the purpose, for your purpose. So look at this. Here, actually, you see a picture on the right side where machines are connected. Left side is desktop, middle is laptop, and mobile devices. So you actually access the cloud services directly from the cloud. You don't care where the location is there or how much space is needed. All this is taken care by the service provider. Okay. And here is another service providers like Google Apps, for example, Google Doc or Google Slides, Google Spreadsheet. They can all be directly be used in cloud computing. I mean, used by the user. And this is a summary of our thing. In infrastructure as a service, what you do actually is you get CPUs, disk drives, networks, data centers. Okay, and in the platform as a service, you get development and runtime tools and environment. And in applications, in software as a service, you get these complete ready-to-run applications. Okay. So, any question at this point of time? So now it's interaction time. Sridhar, you can launch the remaining polls, and people can ask questions to me now. Yes. Technically, we cannot merge IAS and PAS. So any questions? How does cloud computing differs from ERP? There's one question called how cloud computing differs from ERP. See, ERP is an enterprise resource planning. See, what actually happened in the earlier years? No, as cloud computing, as cloud computing started, started being used in organizations, people were not able to actually estimate what cloud computing computing can do in their organization. So they went on piece-wise model. For example, they developed payroll systems, they developed material management systems, they developed like accounting system, and so on and so forth. So this actually created one problem. The information is also there in accounting system. There is also information in payroll system and all. So these kind of islands of information are created. So see, for example, if the management, if the marketing department wants some information from accounting, then actually they have to approach accounting software and get the data and get it back to action. So they said that this is not a fine approach because see, now we have created an island of information. How is there any way in which actually we can create a system where we can have an integrated view of the information? So in order to solve that problem, ERP came into existence. So ERP is an enterprise-wide solution problem where actually marketing management is accessible to somebody in sales. The material management person can actually access what is the market standing of a particular product and so on and so forth. So cloud computing is different because cloud computing is not a software. It is a model of providing you different resources, including ERP. And there are companies like Ramco and SAP who actually offer ERP as a solution from the cloud computing platform. So did I answer this question, sir? ERP is a solution for an enterprise. So shall I move next one? So here are the different questions which have been asked in the session so far. I will try to answer them one by one. How can I download this presentation? I have told you, you can go to my website, or at the end of this presentation it will be available on SlideShare. And could you, Ravi Shankar, and can we merge IaaS and PaaS? The answer is no, Mr. Bashir. What it actually means is these are the three fundamental service levels within cloud computing. They remain distinct. So when you are talking about hardware, you are talking about IaaS level. When you are talking about environment, you are talking about PaaS level. Okay. So PaaS level, and you are talking about. So these are distinct both in theory and also in practice. And there is another person actually called Desigan. Okay. What he says is, I thought cloud computing models are the same for different businesses environment. For instance, if one wants to develop an application, okay, in human resources and airline customer management, does these two systems share the same models? Technically, in theory, yes, but they differ in their details. For example, an airline model may be actually located only to a particular airport or something like that. If it is talking about reservation and all, but if it is open connection between the flight attendant and also the master control, then it would have a different model. And the next question is, how does ERP change? Okay. What is the main difference between cloud computing and SOA? Mr. Kunal Dharla is asking me a question like, what is the difference between cloud computing and service-oriented architecture? Well, service-oriented architecture thinks that you can build entire software regime by actually splitting everything into a service. For example, so what we have been building earlier, actually, we are trying to develop a program, then an application, then a system. For example, operating system, there are some services, there are some programs available like loader, monitor, manager, and all. Then we have a system around that. So this kind of very tight integration may not be useful for many reasons, because those services which are built in those applications which are built within operating system might be required from another one also. So what service-oriented approach said that actually build everything as a service. For example, if there is a service needed to load an application, develop as a service, and this service should be available to everybody in the organization. See, for example, if you are running an organization, tax application after application is required by your financial department as well as for the employees. Now, if you make tax application an integrated part of an accounting, then an employee cannot use it. So what service-oriented architecture says is you develop this tax calculation application as a service and make it an isolated so that anybody can access. So that is what service-oriented architecture would be. What cloud computing does is actually it actually takes advantage of service-oriented architecture and it builds every service in a service-oriented architecture mode. So there is another question. Can you give example of this kind of direct use of software for cloud computing? See, there is a question from Hina Chavan. Can you give example of this kind of direct usable software for cloud computing? I am not actually very clear about the question, but what you mean is, I guess you can directly use from the cloud computing platform. If Hina, this is what your question is, then actually the very software that I'm using for this presentation, okay, actually Google Docs can be directly used from the cloud computing directly. All that you need is a browser. And there is another question from Bashar Pandya. What is the security scope of cloud computing and also how security can be provided using cloud to someone to any form? As I told you already, cloud computing is taken enough care for privacy and security, and there are different kind of applications. Mechanism built for that. For example, suppose if you are trying to access YouTube today, then you have to, instead of giving HTTP, you have to give HTTPS. What it actually means is whatever the communication that happens between you and the service provider actually happens in a secure channel. So this kind of a security can be built into cloud computing, every service in every product. Sure. So Mr. Ravi Suraj asked me to speak slowly. Definitely I will do that. Okay. What is the difference between application running on a web server and in the cloud? The question from Padma Priya Muralidharan. What is the difference between application running on a web server and in a cloud? The difference technically no, but when you are running on a web server, that is your web server that you have installed in your organization, you are using it. So if you want to use an application of yours, then you have to install it on web server and start using. Means, for example, in my engineering college, if you are having an email server for all our students, then it is our web server which we have bought giving money, then installed and started using. On cloud computing, that is the web server that service provider. You are not paid for that, you don't maintain it, and you don't even care where it is. All that you want is you are starting using that one. So this is the answer to your question, Padma Priya. And there is a question from Shilpi Harnal. What is virtualization? Virtualization is a method used in cloud computing. You know, physically for everything there is a limit. And cloud computing always permits your unlimited, infinite resources. And how do you achieve this? So this is achieved by what is known as virtualization. So virtualization is a mechanism which actually you convert finite physical resources into infinite. Actually, you don't convert them to infinity, but user you give an impression by actually by separating the consumption from allocation. In traditional computing, what happens is if you buy a machine that belongs to you, but when you are not using it, it remains idle. But whereas in cloud computing, any resource which is allocated to user is withdrawn at the end of the session and given to somebody else. This idea of making physical resources available to many people is called virtualization. Okay, what is the difference between grid computing? Okay, there is another question by Deepika Damodar, who is asking like, what is the difference between grid computing and cloud computing? Okay, in the evolution of computing, we actually had mainframe first, then personal computers, and the LAN networks, and then came this grid computing. In grid computing, actually, the idea of that, so there are occasions where actually I do not have enough number of computers to do the computing which I need. For example, if you are doing a lot of research. And there is only two ways available. What is actually, either you have to buy lot machines for which if you have money, and otherwise actually you can borrow somebody's machine. So grid computing is an idea where actually you can borrow machines from somebody else and start using them. Okay. So by borrowing machines from actually you create a different network which is called a grid. So grid is an idea where actually you borrow different machines from different organizations a particular job and get it done. So when you are taking this option, what it actually means is when somebody is actually allowing, actually lending their machines, they will give this machine on terms and conditions. For example, you can use my machine only for 10 hours a day, or you can use only during the vacation. So grid actually is a stage before cloud computing, where it's a kind of a distributed computing where you can join or you can borrow machine from different people and start using them. This is the answer to DPK. So then another question from Kishore is actually, can you give some idea on cloud computing for education institute? Can we say application as a service? Yes. Yeah, sir. Actually, Mr. Kishore, Dr. Kishore, cloud computing is actually the ideal platform for educational purposes. You can run virtually every application on cloud computing which it can support educational software. For example, in my college, we are part of an autonomous organization. We have to do this NB accreditation and all. Okay, for that we have to have this called output-based education, and you know that's the long process. So we are using a product called Inpods, which actually helps, it provides a cloud-based services, so that actually you can install and host that operation free for the educational purpose. So there is no activity in the educational sphere which cloud cannot support. Can we say application as a service and software as a service are the same? Are there any difference? There's a question by Kunal which says actually application as a service. Okay, see, application is actually a old term, because application, when we are developing, we did in the 1980s, 90s, and even in 2000. Application like a payroll is an application. Okay, student information is an application. So application is slightly bigger than service. Service could be very simple. For example, I told you the service is something which will allow you to convert currency from dollars to rupees. This could be a service, and this cannot be an application. Application is normally bigger than this. So that's the answer. Is multimedia cloud computing is implemented separately then? Then another question from Shilpi Harnal. Is multimedia cloud computing is implemented separately than ordinary cloud? See, when you talk about multimedia, you are talking of difference in the content. Say, for example, there is a text, there is an image, there is a video. Multimedia is what? It is actually a combination of all these three. Okay. So cloud computing for multimedia is not different, but storage for multimedia is different. From that perspective, multimedia cloud is slightly different from regular cloud, because it has only text or video or picture. But in multimedia, all combination would come. So cloud computing is not different, but the storage which is used and required for multimedia is different. Are there any free cloud services providers? Yes. And there is a question, any trial version for cloud computing environment? There is a question from Ravi. Yes, every cloud computing service provider has a trial version today. You can go. If you have a specific requirement, like I want this particular software for a trial version, I can suggest you. Then the question then question from Shilpi, how virtual machines are implemented. I am taking a session on this in about 2 or 3 weeks. Please attend that one, Shilpi. Okay, and the question is, can we use cloud computing for database mirroring for security purpose? Yes. See, there is a question from Ripal Rampara. Can be used for mirroring. In fact, every cloud computing service provider uses the idea of mirroring. If they have a data center in America, they will actually mirror their all contents in Asia. And if they have a database in Asia, they will mirror it to Japan. Okay. So cloud computing is actually one of the best resources for mirroring technology. So I think I can move on to the next. Now almost I have exhausted all the questions. And this is the last question. How cloud computing is connected to with green computing? Okay. Green computing is all about reducing the consumption of resources, and cloud computing is actually a great way in actually which will help green computing. See, for example, sir. For example, see, today what happens is, because of the traditional computing, everybody will have a computer center, everybody will have a machine, and every computer needs power, every data center, every power, actually every service, every server needs cooler and all. In cloud computing, what happens is you are getting services directly from data centers. That means to that extent you are eliminating pollution. Somewhere in the middle of sea, somewhere in the middle of the ocean, in the ocean, somewhere in the middle in the Antarctica, now these people have established a data center. So you don't have a pollution which normally comes from cloud computing. That way, cloud computing will help you to reduce what is known as a carbon print or carbon footprint. And there is a last question from Darshan, who says, how can I get this PowerPoint presentation? I already told you, you can get it from my site on my SlideShare. Are you covering encryption modules at a later date? Yes, Mr. Ravi. And we'll just go back to the presentation now. So this is a summary of service models. So if you want to build a house, then you are building, buying a pieces of hardware, like piece of material, piece of cement and all. If that goes, if you are called actually infrastructure as a service, then if you are buying a ready-made house, then you are buying a platform as a service. And if you are buying a ready-made house with all the furnishing, then it's called software as a service. So next question that we will be asking is, what are the cloud deployment models? So what I covered so far is service models. That means service is something that you get in cloud computing, and there are three basic services. And that the question that we ask is, what do I get? And you get in cloud computing as service. Now we're talking about deployment. See, that means in this actually we're asking one simple question. Suppose I want to use cloud computing for my organization. What are the different ways? So what are the different ways in which actually I can use cloud computing? And the answer is actually is deployment model. And deployment, you know, what it means is you have a resource and you are using it for a particular purpose. For example, we talk that during election we are deploying paramilitary forces for the maintenance of law and order. What it actually means, you have a resource which you are actually using it for a thing. Similarly, we say, no, our army has been deployed across the Indian border. What it means is we have army as a resource which we are using it to protect our country. That process is called deployment. In cloud computing, if you are using, you can actually use cloud computing for 4 different purposes, and that is called deployment purpose. So there are different ways in which actually cloud can be used, and this is actually called cloud computing deployment purpose. So cloud can be used for different ways depending on need for the enterprise. See, as an engineering college, I might need it for storing examination results. As an enterprise, somebody wanted to use it for developing an application. So for different purposes, people do different. So cloud, a particular way in which actually use cloud is called a deployment. And technically, there are 4 different kinds of computing: private, public, hybrid, and community. Let me talk about public cloud. See, public cloud is very simple. See, for example, if I ask you a question, like suppose you are a government, if you want to use a bus in different fashion, how will you use it? Actually, what you do is you buy a bus and actually you start what is known as public transportation. So it is a bus which is run by a government for the public purpose, right? So that's called public transportation. Similarly, cloud computing can be used for public purpose. Companies like Google, okay, and Amazon Web Services, Hotmail, they actually provide services for the public. So that kind of a cloud deployment where something is created for the public consumption is actually called public cloud, like public transportation. Many a times, public transportation or public clouds also meant for, not for a general public, for a set of organization of business. That is also can be called public cloud. And there are many uses for public cloud. For example, you can use public cloud for testing. See, if you are an entrepreneur and you don't have enough resources to test you, and cloud computing service provides you cloud computing resources to test you. You have to upload your program or your code, and they will test on their servers and return back to you. So this is one of the best use of cloud computing environment. If you are an entrepreneur and if you cannot invest part money in your IT infrastructure and IT infrastructure, you can always go for it. And if you are a very enterprising developer, then you can use cloud computing for a public cloud for actually hosting your application, testing your application. In fact, everybody uses this platform as a service to achieve this purpose. So public cloud is the first kind of first metamorphosis of this one. Form actually it is designed and developed for the public consumption. See, there are occasions where actually you want to use cloud for its exclusive reasons. For example, like this, you can see a picture on this. So this is a school bus. This is also a bus. The earlier which I showed you also a public bus or a private public transportation. But what's the difference? In this bus actually it is meant only for the students of that college or probably faculty and teachers of that college. So it is the same bus which is used for a different reason. And in this case actually it is only for the students of this particular class or school. Similarly, if you are using cloud for the private people, that is people who belong to an organization, it's called a private cloud. You look at this on the right side. So there is a picture which shows there's a cloud and there's a lock. That means this lock will restrict others. That means public cannot use this. Only students of the bus on the college or students of that school or the faculty of that or the employees of that they can use it. So that means private cloud is a kind of a cloud where cloud is built for the consumption of a private or inside people. As you can see in this picture, there is an internet on the blue side, on the right side, and there is a wall, and there is internal thing. So this is the firewall which distinguishes between public and private. Only people who are internal to this can use this. And here another picture actually. These private clouds are used by a couple of organizations. For example, Microsoft kind of organization, they have worldwide offices. So they will use, but they all use what is known as standard formats so that the entire enterprise can use it for a common purpose. And the third one is hybrid cloud. See, many times actually one kind of solution will not work. As, for example, suppose you are traveling from say Bangalore to Mumbai. From Bangalore to Mumbai, you take a public transportation like airline, but from the airport probably you go in a car which belongs to you or which belongs to your office. So the combination of travel that you use is public transportation plus private transportation. So the combination in which you mix up things is called hybrid. Similarly, in cloud computing environment, you can also use a combination of clouds to meet your different purposes. See, and that is called hybrid. So there is a private cloud, there is a private public cloud. And why are you using this? There are many reasons. See, for example, in my college we have a hybrid cloud. So the private part of the cloud is used for the internal organization. For example, we have administrative data to store that we are storing on our private cloud. There is confidential information like examination data that we are storing on the private cloud. On the public side, we are actually using it for sharing data with the prospective students or the parents or the existing students or companies like placement companies which visit us. So for that reason, actually, we combine both of them. So hybrid cloud, why they are used? Because as a private cloud, they are secured. As a public cloud, they actually offer you a lot of cost benefits. So what is the reason? You can see that there is economics, there is a speed, there is a scale, there is a control. Control because it is private. There is a speed because there is cloud computing. Economics because it is saving a lot of money for you. So now that I told you public, which is public cloud, and there are private clouds. If you are rich enough, you will do that private cloud. And if you are organization which interface with the public, then you use a combination. So there are many occasions where actually a couple of people will come together and build a property and share it. For example, look at this. There is a community. Each individual cannot afford to buy a piece of land and build a house, but they can always build an apartment and share a flat. So similarly in cloud computing, if enough number of people come together with a common interest, they can build a cloud of their own and they can use it. And that kind of a thing is called community cloud. So look at this. There are three different services. There are different communities. They are using the same common cloud. This will give you two advantages. One is that since all have common interest, they have common policy, common procedure, they can pool together money, their resources and build one. And one example, one real-time example of community cloud is that is developed by Indian Reserve Bank. So Reserve Bank actually built a cloud, community cloud for all the banking institutions in India. Each bank on its own cannot build a cloud of its own. Banks like SBI can build, but there are many small companies like Karnataka Bank and all they cannot build. And similarly, almost all banking operations are identical. Whether you are sending RTGS or you are, fund transfer, they are identical. So since all these applications are identical and many banks need this, now it just makes sense to have a community cloud which can be established. So that is the reason why we established a community cloud. The summary is this: on the left side you see commercial clouds which are there. And there are community clouds which are designed for people which have a common interest. Many times even governments build clouds and they are called government clouds. So any questions at this point of time? So either I have come to the end of the session. Any questions I will take, otherwise I can stop and end here. Any more questions? Any more questions? So the whole summary is this: cloud computing offers three service models that you get either a hardware when you say that you are getting infrastructure as a service, or a platform for the development of application, then it's called platform as a service, or a completely finished service means software called software as a service. So depending on your choice, you can actually choose one of them. So if you are a developer, then you go platform as a service. If you're an organization building your IT infrastructure, then you go for infrastructure as a service. If you're a commoner like us, or an education, a faculty, a general public, then you use software as a service. The second thing that we covered today, deployment model. So what does deployment model ask is, now that I have the cloud technology, what are the different ways for which I can use it? So there are actually four distinct ways in which actually you can use. For example, you can use it for a public purposes. For example, think like Gmail and all. They are the clouds which are built for public purposes, and they are called public clouds. There are organizations which will build cloud for the internal consumption or internal use. They are called private clouds. And there are occasions where actually you have to use a combination of private and public, and that is called hybrid cloud. For example, an education institution will use private cloud for the confidential information storage like examination, fees data, and all. The rest of the things like syllabus or core curriculum or results or attendance report, they will put on public cloud. So that's called hybrid cloud. The fourth category is called actually community cloud, where actually what happens is you can use a group of people have a common interest and a common resource. They can come together and use that one for their purpose. For example, all the banking institutions in India will come and develop a community cloud. So these are the things. Okay. So any questions on this? So now there is another question from Mr. Kunjal, how we can combine cloud computing with big data. See, big data is a phenomenon in which huge amount of data is being generated. In fact, cloud computing is the reason for that. See, today people are generating data on Facebook or Google or Gmail and all. The reason is actually cloud computing is supported. And cloud computing is both the cause of big data and also a solution to big data. So cloud computing resources can actually use to solve or actually process big data. For example, Google has what is known as a GFS, Google File System, which will help you to organize your big data. Google has a Google Compute, which will give you computing power to process it. So big data is actually both the consequence and a benefit of cloud computing. And so there is a question from Minal Shankar. How does cloud computing different from ERP? I think already answered that. The question is same. ERP is a enterprise resource planning, which gives you an integrated view of an organization, which was not earlier, where actually people used to develop applications for different functions. For example, marketing has a different application, sales has a different application, payroll has a different application. Cloud computing has ERP solutions which are hosted on the cloud. But cloud computing is a model of delivering services in which ERP also is included. So any other questions? So if you do not have any questions, I think I have come to the end of the session. Thank you very much for attending the session, and hope we will meet you again during next session.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.